What you're fixing to watch is a podcast that I did called the Woodsman Perspective. Just watch it through, man. It's good stuff. It's not one of these where everything is orchestrated out, sponsored this, sponsored that, all that BS like that. It's just guys sitting down talking. Land, logging, outdoors. All three of us that are on this podcast are huge outdoorsmen, huge deer hunters, and just listen to the history of logging and all that stuff. And there will be a link down below for their podcast.
We're back on the Woodsman Perspective podcast. We talk management and habitat and land, and one of the coolest pieces of that management tool might be the chainsaw or the skidder.
Ain't no doubt.
Here in the southeast, that's one that gets used more than most, I think.
Well, we got a guy in here who's done it a long time, and I've known him all my life, and I'm just happy. A lot of these people know him when they find out who he is.
Well, I told him when he came in, I said, Tim, do people see you? They just feel like they know you from YouTube, because that's how it was. We walked in. It took me a minute to realize I don't guess we'd ever met, but I felt like I knew him.
Well, I can remember Tim leaving every day from school, going to log.
That's right.
And look, none of our friends were loggers.
That's it.
So he was the only man in town, and had this big equipment, and it was, we was envious of it back then. But,
yeah.
But look, none of us run over to grab that saw.
No, it was that's all I've ever done is.
How long have you done it, Tim?
I worked for Dad for 38 years, and 32 full time.
Wow.
So I've been. I've seen a lot of stuff change over the years, and in and out, going on,
You're a conservationist yourself. You've always
Sure.
hunted,
Sure.
bow hunted, deer hunted, turkey hunted. I mean, you've always, it was, not only did you work in the woods, but the woods was your life outside of work.
Correct. I mean, everything I did revolved around the woods, outdoors, no matter what it was, whether it was, if I was in the woods on a machine, cutting timber or whatever, skidding, loading. And then any of my free time was spent in the woods, as far as either, hunting, whether it was turkeys, squirrels, rabbits, deer, it didn't matter, or, and then fishing too, same thing.
Right.
I learned years and years ago, I didn't, sometimes you've got really good places to hunt, this managed and what have you. And I've hunted in some really good places, but then if you don't have that, you have to get really creative, and you have to go where other people don't go.
The extra mile.
Yeah, and you have to do the extra work, and a lot of times that'll pay off for you.
Listen, I've cleaned some of your deer. It pays off. He's pretty sharp on that. A small logging crew is a crew that would get 3 to 5 loads a day.
I would agree with that. Yes.
Middle-size, mid-size crews, most of the crews that I run would get 10 to 12 loads a day. Tim, tell me how many loads a day y'all would get.
There was our biggest day we ever loaded was 43 loads in a day, and
So people, what I'm telling you is, Tim could cut a 40-acre block down in one day. The ground that Tim and TDK were logging was ground that could never be cut with chainsaws and a cable skidder.
Oh yeah.
So they were getting to cut some gravy, but it was hard to get to.
The equipment gave you an advantage.
Oh, it's amazing what that
did.
thing looked like. I mean,
It did. Very, very big stuff, very expensive stuff. We, starting out of the gate back in the 80s, we did it, just chainsaws, hand felling, cable skidders, topping everything with chainsaws and what have you.
You still do a lot of hand.
Yeah.
You do a lot of chainsaw cutting yourself.
That's right. Out of the 70s and in the 80s, predominantly everything was just high graded. And you went to the first limb and you cut it off. And then as we got a pulp mark at the end, that was still kind of being done. But we figured out real quick that if you put money on the grade stuff and you didn't have no money on the pulp stuff that was getting left, and you captured that stuff and you got on the truck and you got it to the mill, that was almost 100% profit. You could put all that money in your pocket. And so you could run through there, and you could, if you were buying the timber yourself, you could maximize the track a lot by doing that. It was land then was a liability. It was not an asset.
So then you had millions of
You
acres.
don't hear that very often. Like that.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, I mean, it was back then in that time, and that's the reason why Weyerhaeuser ended up with so much property, was it was a liability.
The taxation was so bad.
Yeah,
When you think about big landowners now, some of those were forward thinking and bought it then.
Right.
Because it could be bought.
And when we crossed over into 1993, that's when timber absolutely totally exploded. It skyrocketed. It went off the charts. If you had property, you could make an insane amount of money off of timber. You could actually buy a piece of property, cut the timber on it, and pay for it, and still have the land, no problem.
That's right.
I hunted for forever and didn't see a deer. I went because I loved
y'all's
it.
family land?
Yeah, I went because I loved going, and I had a couple of uncles that would take me at Christmas and Thanksgiving, and that was my entire highlight of the whole year, was getting to that, because I knew that when they came in, they'd take me hunting.
Ain't that something?
And I would sit there, they would put me out somewhere and tell me to stay there, don't go anywhere.
Was it dog running in?
And no, we wasn't running any dogs. It was all still hunting in, and would sit there. And sometimes that was before the clothes that we got now. And I would just tough it out, tough it out, I'm very challenge driven, and that just lit a fire under me to still burns even today.
Yeah. So we're up there logging, and I get a phone call, and I said, "Hey Chris, we've been vandalized." I said, "Oh man," I said, "I'll be on up there." So we get up there, and typical Tim, CB radios stole out of the thing, windows busted, whatever CBs they could steal. So we had a work truck sitting up there, and so they was fisting, we was getting a report and kind of figuring it out. And one of them guys they left the work truck in there, had a water cooler. So he was finna reach down and get him to drink that water. I said, "Man, you better check that cooler now." I mean, that's, I wouldn't. He popped the top on him, and somebody done took a big slam in that cooler.
Oh gosh.
There was 2 turds floating in the cooler, and I thought to myself,
"That's bad.
That's rough." And
That's bad.
I said,
a volume logger, like Chris said a while ago, you could literally cut 20 acres in a day, and everything. So you got a lot of these fragmented tracts where people got 20s, 40s, things like that. It costs so much to move, to pick up the equipment, the permits, the manpower, all that stuff to move. And if you're not moving too far, it's not as bad. But if you're moving a 30 or 40 mile move, then you get into a multi-day move right there real quick. And so you need something that you can kind of sit down on and you can log on. And with the cost of what everything has went to, is put all of those 40 load a week loggers out. There's nobody.
There's none.
There used to be them everywhere. People may be asking, why are we in this situation right here? Why can somebody with a 20 or 40 can't just readily get it thin or get a logger in there? It's basic. I wrote it down: supply and demand. I want to share the best track we ever cut. Was down in Hill County, Alabama, down there at Greensboro, 80-acre block. Timber buyer bought it, paid $425,000 for just the timber on that thing.
Wow.
80 acres. Then the timber company bought it from him for $450,000. That was in 2002. We got the call. The plywood mill was still running wide open at Millport at that time. We got the call to go down there and merchandise and cut it for them. And we went down there and cut that thing. I hand cut. They marked double ring poles throughout the track. There wasn't an astronomical amount of them, but there was a lot of them in there. And a double ring pole at that time, I don't know what it is now, but at 80 foot, it still had
transmission pole.
Yeah,
what he's talking about, light pole.
Yeah,
he's talking about.
It had to be 12 inches diameter on a little end with no knots.
Wow. No sweep.
And these things, and so they had to be cut and dropped between the stumps. So because they hit a stump on the ground, they just broke like glass.
Right.
Oh yeah. So I listen to a lot of podcasts all the time. I put my AirPods in and I'll sit there while I'm hunting or doing something else. If I'm on a machine by myself and I got my helmet on, I'll put my muffs down and I'll link my phone back to the muffs and I'll listen to a podcast like that. And those right here with Chris and Brent are the ones that I really, really like, that are not all just everything orchestrated out where you got this big, huge production. It's just normal things, talking about normal stuff and enjoying that. And I told them they've got a great thing going. all they need to do is just get more content out, and that's where the rubber meets the road, and it's here in our area too. Very cool deal. Chris is actually a forester here in our area, has been since he graduated from Mississippi State over there. And then Brent's a huge outdoorsman too, and Chris manages a lot of property, buys and sells a lot of property and everything, and I've been around him lots and lots of times over the years, and done deals with him, and we've cut timber for him too. So if you want to check out their podcast, man, check it out. Appreciate y'all watching. We'll catch y'all later. Later, taters.